Alright, so we're going to pad stitch the collars on these. Pad stitching is a period technique for shaping clothing. Okay, if you read Matthew Nagy's Modern Maker, he basically pad stitches the entire doublet. If you look through Patterns of Fashion, you'll see examples of pad stitching where they pad stitch the entire doublets to shape them around the body, because, well, the body's not a square or flat plane. It has curves and shapes and everything else like that. I use pad stitching to add support to my collar so that they stand up and that they're shaped properly. A lot of people, modern people, will use something known as interfacing. They usually iron it in, and the problem with that stuff is it wears out. It kind of disintegrates after a couple washes. I just pad stitched this collar the other day, and you can see it's nice and setting up straight already. Now I'm going to cut the excess off here in a second. So I mean, you can see what it does. It literally took me about 15 minutes to do this. So it's not a difficult hand sewing technique. It's probably one of the easiest ones you'll ever learn, but the results speak for themselves. Now, as to the material I use when I pad stitch, I like to use a duck cloth, which is a heavy canvas type material. You'll be able to use them. I have extra for you guys to use, so don't worry about buying one. All you need is a small piece. You can see I have this piece right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a rectangular-esque piece, approximately 20 inches long, or a couple inches longer than my collar, and about 5 inches wide. Okay? It doesn't have to be a perfect rectangle. It does have to be cut on the bias. Okay? This is a piece of fabric that has been cut on the bias. And we're going to be putting it into this collar piece. I want to make it larger than my collar piece. Okay? That's very, very important. Don't try to cut it to the shape of the collar. All right? What we're going to do is we're going to sew it in here, and then we're going to cut away the excess. So you can see, if I were to lay my collar piece over this piece, you can see that it's actually bigger than my collar. And that's what I want. I want it to be bigger than my collar piece. Next comes the ironing. Now this is a very interesting little ironing technique, okay? First I iron it flat just to get all the wrinkles out of it. I have my iron set on my hottest setting because this is a canvas duck cloth, like I said. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take my iron and I'm going to iron this edge into a curve. You can see I'm stretching it into a curve as I press. Okay, that's one edge. I'm going to take it and I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other edge. Okay, this is going to create a rather unique shaped piece. This is why we need to use a bias cut piece. Alright, because we want to get that stretch. Okay, you can see I've already managed to make it kind of almost shape a little bit like a collar. If you think about your collar, it's slightly curved on the top. The body of the doublet is also slightly curved, and it pinches in right here at the neck seam. And that's essentially what we've done with this piece of cloth. What pad stitching does is essentially it uses the physics of the material to pinch and hold fabric into place. Okay? So what I just did is I just basically found the center of my piece of fabric so that I can start pinning it to my collar. Now when I pin it, all I'm really going to do is just kind of try to secure it there. I'm not really, I'm trying to kind of stretch it and shape it as I go along. But you can see, I really don't care if the edges match up. Alright? And what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to put a pin about every 3-4 inches just to kind of hold it, tack it in place, so to speak. Okay? And again, this is bigger than my collar section, so I really, as long as it covers my whole collar, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it can hang off. We're going to cut away the excess, like I said. Okay? So I like to do 2 rows of pins. I've seen people pad stitch without pinning it. Okay, yeah, that's up to you. I like to pin mine in place. Like I said, the whole idea of this is that by the time we finish sewing it, we're going to shape as we sew. Okay, so what is actually happening is we're going to make the 2 pieces of fabric kind of war against each other. Okay, this canvas-like fabric, like I said, is our interface. And by the way, this piece of fabric won't show at all, because we're going to put a lining right over the top of it. So it doesn't matter what color it is or anything else, or even what kind of fabric it is. And since it's on your neck, you're really not going to be touching your neck. So again, having a piece of canvas up there, not a big deal. Okay, I usually actually, when I line it, use a piece of satin or silk because it feels really good against my neck. But anyways, what we're doing, if you can imagine, this is my fashion fabric, and this is that lining. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to sew the 2 together so that that lining is continuously pulling up on the fashion fabric. It's what we're using. We're using the physics of the fabric to let them pull against each other and do that. So when I sew, I want to just use all-purpose thread, and I want to use a single strand of it, okay? Because again, we're not going for securing the 2 pieces together, so it has to be really strong. Well, all we're doing is we're really kind of tacking the piece of fabric to it, and this is probably the most interesting part. So I mean, literally, all I need is a single strand of thread. I just let a tail hang off and that kind of thing. You really don't even need to knot it. All you really need to do is do 3 securing stitches and it's fine. Now, what we're going to do, and this is the interesting part, okay? What I'm doing is I'm pitching the material across my finger, and I'm actually pulling on that top layer and rolling it across my finger like this, okay? So I'm literally rolling it. I've got it pinched here and I'm rolling it together, and I'm finding the very, very corner of my fabric, which is where I'm going to start, and I'm going to insert my needle across that roll, okay? The idea is that I'm going to catch about 2 threads on the other side. So I'm actually going to stab myself in the finger with the needle. Yes, I am. Okay? Not going to draw blood. You're just going to catch about 2 or 3 threads on the other side. And like I said, first stitch, sew it 3 times in a row, and guess what? You don't need to tie a knot in your thread. Knots become bulky. So, Then all I'm going to do is I'm going to move about a ½ inch down the fabric in a straight line going down the collar, and I'm going to do another stitch. I'm going to go about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. And I'm going to do another stitch, and so on and so forth. And you can see this is not complicated sewing, okay? I'm doing a single stitch this way, okay? I'm catching about 2 or 3 threads on the outside of the fashion fabric so that this really won't show at all. All right, I'm going to show you the back side here in a second. But yeah, I'm trying to use a thread color that matches my fashion fabric as best as possible. All right, that's why I went to Joann's and got this lovely apple green thread. It's fantastic. It matches my thread. The most interesting part, usually I sit down and watch a movie while I'm doing this. Like I said, usually it only takes me about 15-20 minutes, so I just watch some show while I'm doing this. It's not really all that complicated. I'm going to go stitch, 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 stitch. When I get to this end, I'm going to keep my fabric in the same direction, and I'm just going to stitch, 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 stitch back this direction. I don't want to turn my fabric, because I want to keep that curl going over my finger. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, put the needle in here. But you can see, can't even see where I've been sewing. Okay? That's the section I'm sewing between my 2 fingers. Okay? At most, you're going to see maybe a little dimple in the fabric. Okay? And like I said, I finished this one. Okay? And I used a grayish thread, okay, on this one, which doesn't even match this collar, and you can't see a single stitch. If you look really closely, you may be able to pick up a little pit, but that's about it, okay? So this is, like I said, this is a completed one, and you can see from the stitches, I'll show it into the camera right here. Got it? Good. All right. So, but you can see from the stitches, I stitched all the way this direction, I went down a ½ inch, and I did another row back this direction. And I went down, and I went in. And I do it until I've reached the seam of the collar. And I do one row even with the seam, okay? All right? And that's about it. All right? So this is a finished pad stitching. Then you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to lay my collar down like this. And I'm going to cut away the excess fabric. I'm also going to cut away the excess trim while I'm at it. And when I go to line my collar, I'll do a very similar thing, okay? We'll probably videotape that when I actually line this collar. But basically what I do is I just cut a large rectangular piece on the bias. I iron the corners of the curve. I place it over here. I sew right around the edge of my collar. I cut away the excess. That's how we line the collar. That's to make sure that none of the shaping gets taken out of this collar. Because you can see it. All I had to do is cut away the excess. And there we go. We have a nice little line on the collar. And usually I'll clip this at the bottom. Because again, we're dealing with a curve here, and we want the material to be able to kind of stretch itself out and curve. And I'm cutting away the corner here because that's usually where a buttonhole goes, and we don't want a lot of excess material in there if we can help it. Okay, and since it doesn't need to be there, we're just going to cut it away because that just gets it away from the seam. But again, you can see this collar has a lovely shape to it, okay? Stands up on its own, yeah. And we can take it, we can, curl it around our fingers. It naturally wants to kind of curl out like that. It's magic, okay? And this will hold up to wash after wash after wash. I have doublets that I literally made 15 years ago that I pad stitched the collar, still stands up like this, okay? It is a wonder, and it is completely period. That's the cool thing. It is 100% period. Now in period, would they have used a duck cloth? No, they didn't have duck cloth. This is cotton duck cloth. But they would just use like a heavy canvas linen, which you can use. It would be, I've used a medium weight linen to pad stitch a collar, and it worked just fine. So I mean, all you really need is something that's a little bit stiff, a little bit stiffness to it, and you can shape. And that's really what you want. So I mean, it's gonna have a little bit of stretch because you're using a bias, but that's it. Any questions on this? Cool. So when you guys get to your part where you're doing this, like Richard, you're ready to do this part. I'll help you out and get you going, okay? But you will need a hand sewing needle and probably a thimble. You'll notice I wear my thimble on my middle finger, and I grab my needle and I push it this way, okay? It's more ergonomic to sew that way. I know modern thimbles, they put them on the index finger, you kind of push it through that way. It's just a pain to play. This I can keep sewing. I can just grab and sew, grab and sew, grab and sew. And it's a much better way to use a thimble. So just so you guys know, that's how I use my thimble. How you use your thimble is completely up to you. All right. This is not my thimble, but it worked. All right. Cool. Well, I'm gonna finish pad stitching this one, and then we're gonna videotape how to do a lining. Okay. Just because I'm at that stage. Okay. Got it. All right. So just like the piece of fabric that we cut to do the pad stitching with. That's exactly what we're going to do when we want to do the lining. We're going to take a piece of fabric, cut a roughly couple inches bigger than our actual collar. So I mean, this collar is about 16 inches long, so I'm using a roughly rectangular shape, approximately 20 inches by 5 inches. Okay. Now, depending on your collar length, you know, all you really need, like I said, is just a piece of square fabric or rectangular shaped fabric, bigger than your collar, and you know, a couple inches longer, you know, than your collar height. Doesn't have to be. There is no exact measurement. I mean, you know, it's just roughly rectangular. It needs to be cut on the bias, just like the other piece. This is just a scrap piece of linen I have. I'm just, you know, chopping it up to use for this collar lining. You can use any fabric you want for your collar lining. This is a way to add a little accent to your doublet. If you want to use like a really shiny, silky satin piece, go right ahead, use that. If you want to use a neat little print or maybe embroider something and put it in there, it's going to show because your collar's going to be flipped out a little bit. So it's going to show. And this is the part of lining that's going to show. So, I mean, you know, do what you wish. Again, just like the lining piece, I'm going to take it and I'm going to iron it in a curve. Now, if you're using silk or satin, you will still have to iron it. You just have to use a lower setting on your iron so that you don't damage the fabric. But again, I'm just taking it and I'm ironing in a curve. I always want to pull this curve. Yeah, it needs to be like an outside curve. You can see I'm always, I start by pulling it away and then I pull it towards, so that I get that funny little shape again. And then again, I'm just going to kind of lay this in my collar. Okay? Just want to lay it in there. And I'm just going to smooth it out. And what I'll do is, I'll pin the edges. And then I'll go around and I'm going to sew a straight stitch right along the edge of the collar. Kind of like I did when I did my applique. This is going to give me my shape. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to trim off all this excess material. Okay? So that's all I really do is just kind of lay it in there. Get it to where it's nice and smooth. Straight stitch around the edge, cut off the excess. That's it. Yes?
The straight stitch is done by a machine, right?
Yeah, on the machine. I straight stitch it on the machine. You can hand sew it in there if you really want to. But, I mean, what's the point? And then, I'll come along and I'm going to cover up the edge with bias tape. Yeah, so, yes?
What about the seam edge where it meets?
Like I said, it's going to get covered up with bias tape. Oh, you mean right
Yes,
here?
yeah.
Oh, that's going to get covered up by the lining.
Serge
Yeah.
it?
No, don't need to serge it. This is one of the pieces that doesn't get serged. So now when I lay my lining in, my lining's going to come up. I'll curl it over and whip stitch it across to line it in there. You'll see that when we do the lining piece. All right. So collar, I lay it in there like I said. I straight stitch using the machine around the edge. I usually start just about quarter to a half inch just below where the collar seam is in the body, and then I go up to the corner, across the top, and down around the other side. And then again, I'm going to trim off the excess, and I'll clip the bottom to make sure it can spread out into the body. Okay, but this is an easy way to kind of just lay in a collar lining. It will always fit. It'll always be the right size, and it won't ruin that lovely shaping that you just did with the bad pad stitching. That's the idea. That's why you don't cut a collar lining the shape of the collar. Because this lining is actually taking up more area than the collar itself is, because it has to curve over that curl you just made. So, I mean, you want to kind of just lay it in there rather than try to precision mark it. So like I said, you lay it in there, straight stitch around the edge, cut off the excess. That's all you really need to do. Okay? All right? Cool? Cool. All right.